Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. As you might have seen by the title, this is episode 100. And I really wanted to do one of those recap, catching up episodes for episode 100. But it turns out there's just so much to talk about in the Surfer Girl album, I really want to get to it. So we'll do sort of a catch up and sort of a look back in the next episode 101. But I wanted to thank everybody for sticking with me through these 100 episodes. So let's get to the Surfer Girl album, and we're going to talk about side 2 now. We talked about side 1 in episode 99, of course. And what a great way to kick off the episode to talk about the lead track on side 2 of the Surfer Girl album, In My Room. This is the first real indication that the Beach Boys might be something more than just a bit of teen fun. Now, arguably, they've done some great work before this. Surfer Girl's a great song. But this is where they really begin to sort of transcend the genre and go to places that very few other bands would or could. To begin with, the lyrics absolutely fly in the face of so much else in early 60s teen music, and ironically run counter to so much of the music on this album in particular. With all the confidence, surfers rule, catch a wave and you're sitting on top of the world. South Bay surfers who are rough and ready to handle anything, and little deuce coops that will walk a thunderbird like she's standing still. In among all these songs Brian says were about competition, we suddenly have vulnerability, taking refuge in your room. This kind of stuff wasn't much talked about in teen music in 1963, or anywhere else for that matter. Of course, we can read a lot into it knowing Brian's later history, but apart from that, it shows a willingness to be a little more intimate and a little more real than most artists were willing to be. Brian's music, of course, is a perfect complement to these lyrics, and arguably you see the unique personality that is Brian Wilson coming through here for the first time. Gary Usher said that he and Brian wrote the song after watching a baseball game on TV. Brian's recollection was that they'd been tossing a baseball around outside the Wilson house pretending that they were the Yankees. And elsewhere, Usher seems to remember that they were playing over the line, which is a simplified form of baseball using fewer players, someplace else, and then came to the Wilson home to write it. They do agree that they wrote it at the Wilson house in about an hour, and that both Audrey and Murray were there. Apparently Audrey told them it was beautiful, and Murray said to Gary Usher, "Not bad, Usher, not bad," which Gary remembered as the kindest thing Murray Wilson ever said to him. Gary Usher was key to the composition of the lyrics, but he always was careful to point out that the melody was 100% Brian's. The finished recording features Brian, Dennis, Carl, Mike, and Alan, still a former member of the group, on vocals. David Marks is there on guitar, and again we have Maureen Love on harp. A demo version of Uncertain Date was released on the 30 Years of Harmony box set in 1993. It features a different intro and a very different vocal arrangement, which is really interesting. It's not as good as the one that was released, but it is interesting to sort of see the development of the song. Later on October 28, 1963, In My Room was released as the B-side of Be True to Your School, inaugurating a new Beach Boy tradition. With this single, the group graduated from the old formula of surf song on the A-side, car song on the B-side, to fast one on the A-side, slow one on the B-side, which they'd stick with more or less through Help Me Rhonda in the spring of 1965. In My Room charted on its own, reaching number 23 on December 23, 1963, the same week the A-side peaked at number 6. The Beach Boys also cut a German language version of In My Room in March of 1964, using Take 13 from the original sessions as the backing track. The German title is Ganz allein, which translates as All Alone, and probably works better with the melody than the literal German translation, In meinem Schlafzimmer. They were doing this in an attempt to break the Beach Boys in Europe, but when they started breaking through with the original English language versions, this German version went unreleased and remained in the can until 1983, when it was released on the Beach Boys Rarities album. And incidentally, on the Beach Boys Rarities outer sleeve, it's just listed as In My Room, so there's no way to tell what's rare about this particular track unless you get the album home and open it up and see the description inside. Next up is another highlight of side 2, Hawaii. The Beach Boys appeared on the Show of Stars with Dee Dee Sharp, the Treniers, and Jackie DeShannon in Hawaii from June 14th to June 22nd, playing 16 shows in 9 days. Brian stayed home with Alan appearing in his place. According to David Marks, the group had a great time, which isn't hard to believe. Murray also stayed home, so that might have helped. The song was written shortly after the group returned to LA. Initially, this and Catch Away from this album were credited just to Brian Wilson, with Mike getting credit for the lyrics after his lawsuit in 1994. It's another strong tune from Brian, a great performance by the band, a great vocal performance, particularly Brian's falsetto. And again, this is a song that would have been a strong contender for an A-side for most bands. In fact, it was released as an A-side in Australia, where it went to #2 during the Beach Boys tour in February of 1964. Hawaii was also released as a single or EP in Germany, Sweden, and Japan. Also, Hawaii is one of the very first Beach Boy recordings to feature the indomitable Hal Blaine, whose drumming would become such a fixture of Beach Boys recordings in the very near future. Here he plays timbales, it's still Dennis on the drum kit. The next track is Surfer's Rule, which from the punctuation you would think is about a rule that a surfer has, but it's meant to be a boast, Surfer's Rule. From the beat and structure, it harkens back to an earlier period of the Beach Boys, though it certainly played with much more strength and assurance and a much more complex vocal arrangement. Lyrically, it's another one of those competition songs that Brian says were so much a part of his work at the time, and Dennis gets the lead vocal, which is appropriate for the real surfer of the group. There's a little added competition as Brian does a Walk Like a Man style falsetto while the rest of the group sings Four Seasons, You Better Believe It. This would have been a highlight of any of the two earlier albums, but here it's a bit of a throwback for a band that's moving as quickly as the Beach Boys are. The next track is Our Car Club, which started as the provisionally titled Rabbit's Foot, which we got to hear on the late 2013 copyright extension download-only release, The Big Beat 1963. Many sources cite Our Car Club's similarity to Mongo Santa Maria's Watermelon Man, which hit its chart peak of #10 on April 27, 1963, one spot ahead of the #11 Surfin USA. Surfin USA, of course, was on its way up the chart at the time, peaking at #3 on May 25th. I can hear some similarity, but to be honest, it's not something that I would have picked up on myself. Whatever the origin, it's a great, tight, energetic instrumental track that makes a great showcase for Hal Blaine's driving drum and Steve Douglas's saxophone. And Mike Love's lyrics pick up on the social side of car culture. In fact, when I was in high school, a friend of mine got so excited about this song that he actually suggested that we start our own car club, despite the fact that he was the only one among us that had a car, and his Chrysler Newport was really not enough to inspire us to set a meeting, get a sponsor, and collect some dues. But it does show that this was still appealing to the teen crowd even a dozen-plus years after it was originally released. It's a strong, sophisticated track that shows just how far the Beach Boys had come in a very short time. Next up is Your Summer Dream. It's interesting to note how different the arrangements are for the slow ones on the Surfer Girl album. From the string arrangement on Surfer Moon, to the full vocal sound of In My Room, with mostly electric arrangement and harp, to Surfer Girl's Four Freshmen Meet Doo-Wop sort of arrangement and restrained surf guitar, to this arrangement featuring a strummed guitar and drums. This is another highlight of the album. Like Surfer Girl, you get the impression that the singer is wishing he was in a relationship rather than in one. It's sort of a bittersweet longing, both sad and hopeful, as is the case with a lot of the group's best music. And this is the melody I hear in my head whenever I watch a sunset over the Pacific. It's beautiful work. That impression is immediately smashed by the next track, Boogie Woodie, which is credited to Rimsky-Korsakov arrangement Brian Wilson. Even the booklet inside the 1990 twofer Surfer Girl and Shutdown Volume 2 says, this is based on Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee. Or is it? The song is based on Boogie Woogie by B. Bumble and the Stingers from 1961, written by Clarence Pinetop Smith. The songs are extremely similar, the main difference being an intro of about 40 seconds that the Beach Boys omit. The Beach Boys version is played faster and features an organ, and of course they've surferized it by changing the title to Boogie Woodie. In his excellent book, Becoming the Beach Boys 1961 through 1963, James B. Murphy points this out and asserts that Brian would have known the song already through Audrey, who we know was a formidable boogie-woogie piano player and taught the song to the Wilson boys when they were young. Pinetop Smith's original version, called Pinetop's Boogie Woogie, was released in 1929 and was reputed to be the first song with the words Boogie Woogie in the title. Pinetop's Boogie Woogie, in turn, borrows heavily from Honky Tonk Train Blues by Meade Lux Lewis from 1927, which is reputed to be the first song with honky tonk in the title. Apparently, Smith and Lewis knew each other and were living in the same Chicago boarding house around the time these tunes were cut. My guess would be that Audrey knew it not from the Pinetop Smith original, but from Tommy Dorsey's version, which went to number 3 in 1938. It was re-released in 1943 and went to number 5, and again in 1944 when it went to number 21. Boogie Woogie was hot in the late 30s, almost the way disco was 40 years later, and Audrey would have been 21 at the time, which would have made her the prime age to be right in the thick of the Boogie Woogie craze. So Pinetop Smith wrote the song. Why is it credited to Rimsky-Korsakov arrangement Brian Wilson? In Becoming the Beach Boys, Murphy posits, I'm sure correctly, that it has to do with the fact that B. Bumble and the Stingers' prior single, Bumble Boogie, was based on Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee. Bumble Boogie was their most well-known hit, having gone to number 21 on May 8, 1961. B. Bumble and the Stingers began as a group of studio musicians. After they became successful, an actual group was formed. They followed their hit Bumble Boogie with their version of Boogie Woogie. Apparently somebody got confused by all the B's and Bumbles and Boogies, so Boogie Woodie ended up credited to Rimsky-Korsakov instead of Pinetop Smith. On top of that, B. Bumble and the Stingers' Bumble Boogie is not credited to Rimsky-Korsakov, but to Jack Fina, a Boogie Woogie piano player who adapted the tune as Bumble Boogie and recorded it with Freddie Martin and his orchestra in 1946. Their version hit number 7 in 1946 and was also credited to Jack Fina, not Rimsky-Korsakov arrangement Jack Fina. The Beach Boys album gives credit back to Rimsky-Korsakov, but does it on a song written by Pinetop Smith. Welcome, I guess, to the wild and crazy world of mid-20th century music publishing credits. The track itself is very un-Beach Boy-like, and as you may have noticed, it's a song I often make fun of. We know that Brian Wilson has long had a capacity to play Boogie Woogie piano longer and with more intensity than most people would think was humanly possible or even healthy, but it's an influence, and straight Boogie Woogie really seems out of place on a Beach Boy album. As it is, with it being a little under 2 minutes, it's a bit of harmless fun that I really don't mind, just don't put it on a loop for me. It is a very strange way to end the album. It punctures the mood after Your Summer Dream almost as effectively as the Bull Session with Big Daddy would do with side 2 of Beach Boys Today a year and a half later. It's as if after all these great tracks, complicated productions like Our Car Club and Little Deuce Coupe, strong pop songs like Catch a Wave and Hawaii, beautiful ballads like Surfer Girl and Your Summer Dream, a transcendent confessional like In My Room, they end with something of a musical joke. It's sort of the equivalent of throwing up their hands and going, just kidding folks, we're really just a bunch of goofs. The Surfer Girl album, like the Surfer Girl single, peaked at number 7. The album hit its chart peak on November 23, 1963 behind In the Wind by Peter, Paul and Mary, the second Barbra Streisand album, Elvis Gold Records Volume 3 reaching its number 3 chart peak, Trini Lopez at PJ's at number 4, Ray Charles' Ingredients in a Recipe for Soul at number 5, and the self-titled Peter, Paul and Mary album at number 6. If Surfin USA had been a key essential surfing album, with Surfer Girl, the Beach Boys already passed out of the genre. Apart from Don't Back Down on the All Summer Long album, there would be no more surfing songs. With this album, Brian and the group served notice that they were more than just a flash-in-the-pan teen group singing about the latest hot fad. From here on, it was full steam ahead for the Beach Boys into new musical territory. Thanks for hanging in on this 2-part look at the Surfer Girl album. As I was putting these episodes together, I was struck with the idea that this album often gets passed over very quickly in Beach Boy books and documentaries. I think with the benefit of the years, we can see how a lot of these songs were harbingers of even better things to come. So people sometimes, I think, boil it down to a stepping stone between the early surf albums and the later teen symphonies to God without really spending some time on the unique and excellent listening experience that is the Beach Boys' Surfer Girl album. At some point, we'll return to 1963 to talk about the last third of the year and the Beach Boys' third album of 1963, Little Deuce Coupe. Meanwhile, love to hear your comments. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done that. I really appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.